welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name is Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs, and try to do those things more responsibly. Today, I have another conversation on the topics of gender and femininity for you with my friend Alyssa. I met Alyssa through a local meetup group here, and since I've known her, her friendship and conversations have just been so delightful, and I'm really excited that I get to share this conversation we had about her Jewish faith, what it means to her to embody femininity in Judaism, and we kind of explore a little bit of what does it mean to see the divine feminine and how is that expressed. So enjoy the conversation. Alyssa, thank you for coming to my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
No, I'm so excited. Before we get going, why don't you just give a brief introduction? Who are you? Whatever you feel like is relevant.
My name is Alyssa, and I am a Jewish woman, and I am married to a New Zealander who is not Jewish, and it's been interesting.
Yeah.
Having an international and inter-religious relationship.
Yeah.
But very, very helpful for a lot of growth orientation.
Yeah, it kind of stretches you, huh?
Yeah. Challenges as well. We have 2 black cats who are the cutest little babies, bitsies in the world. And goodness, what else about me? There's a lot about me. I cover my hair, obviously, as part of Jewish women ritual.
Yeah.
And so that's often a standout thing, but I absolutely have red hair underneath here. So that's been fun growing up with. What else? Just excited to be here, and thank you as well for sharing dinner beforehand.
Oh, of course.
Nice.
No, it was delicious. I've never had peanut butter in a pasta, as I told you, and I'm sold. So you'll have to give me the recipe.
Sweet. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, okay. So I asked you to come here today because I'm working through sort of the topics of gender and what it means to be masculine and feminine, and especially sort of in this realm of religion. And I just love your passion for the Torah and women in the Torah, and I wanted to just have a conversation with you and see where it goes. So why don't you kind of explain your love for those and sort of your understanding of that as a Jewish person?
Thank you. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I want to start off with that being Jewish is a journey, very much.
That seems very seeped into your stories as well.
Yes. So I was born Jewish, grew up as a Reformed Jew, more laid back, I guess, in regards to like law and like Jewish law. And through that journey, I had a defining point at about 16-ish that I was like, oh, okay, I want to continue to be Jewish. So that was a pretty defining point in my journey. And then from there, that led to some other things around 18. And I was like, there's something missing, as every like 18-year-old is like, there's more to the world. So I did some more, or started to reach out for different things. And then I went off to college, and I was like, whoa, there's other ways to be Jewish. I was like part of youth group and stuff growing up as well. But going to college really showed me this other ways to be Jewish, and much more involved in Judaism and different I don't know, more resources.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I don't totally know the difference in all of those expressions. I've been through a variety of different sort of Christian denominations and Christian expressions, but how varying is it within the Jewish faith? Is there a lot of that sort of differences, or is there more, from sort of your outside perspective, more similarities in those differences? I mean, like, what do they look like?
I mean, if we're thinking about a spectrum, I mean, I think they're more alike than they are different. Okay. But the expression of that looks very different. So if you have one person on one end of a spectrum and they see somebody on the other, like, what? And it's like, oh, I don't want to live my life like that. So I think, so coming from a Reform Jewish background, like didn't grow up keeping kosher, didn't grow up, I don't know, keeping the Sabbath. I mean, we did in our own ways, but it's not like the specific law that's set out.
Right.
It was more of like, you're finding your own relationship with Hashem, with God, and but at the same time, like, it also instilled this beauty of religion and background and ritual within me. But the other end of that spectrum, being more orthodox, being more law-abiding, being more like your stereotypical black hat, black clothing New Yorkers.
Curls.
Yes, yes. So like that kind of stereotype, whereas like a Reformed Jew might look like, you know, the stereotype of like a California Jew who's like from LA. I don't know if that brings to mind anything, but in my mind it makes a lot of sense. But along this spectrum, there's all these different expressions. But I would say the defining piece throughout that is the Torah and the mitzvot, the laws, the good deeds that you're going to be doing as a part of the law that's set out. That's, I would say, the defining piece throughout all of this. But your relation to that is probably different at different expressions or different approaches.
Yeah, so I've been to your, what do you call it, a synagogue or a parish?
Synagogue.
Synagogue, okay.
A shul.
Shul, okay.
Yeah. It's in the name.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. How different is sort of the form of that to, say, if I walked into a Reformed Jewish service?
I'd say one striking thing you might come across in a Reform service is that there is a choir or melody with instrumentation. In the shul that we go to, it's more of our voices are that melody, is that instrumentation. We are, as a community, bringing that beauty of voice and song as compared to a choir bringing that in. So my mom actually is in the choir at the synagogue that I grew up in, and so I found that to be very striking and beautiful. I really enjoyed that. But now seeing this in this type of community, I also see the beauty within that. And that, I think, falls a little bit more, like not having the instrumentation, falls a little bit more in the kind of Orthodox approach to things, maybe, being that like instruments for the Sabbath are not good. That you're not supposed to do that. But, and so I also, I don't know where, I mean, it's probably some law there, but like also stemming from like Catholic tradition and having a choir of angels. But I mean, it's also like a choir of angels, you know, heavenly angels, but like also the sense of like we're defining ourselves against that tradition, and like, oh, you know, like we are not Christians or whatever, of that kind of brotherly mentality.
Yeah. So do they do the same sort of prayers and things like in a Reform service? Or and I'm assuming that they do it in Hebrew as well, or do they adjust?
Yeah. Where I grew up, we did have Hebrew, as well as some English prayers, or like a Hebrew prayer is sung and then the English is maybe recited after. But I don't know if that's fully true of all Reform synagogues. I think it is from all of those that I've been at, but there's also like the Reconstructionist sect of Judaism as well, which I really don't know as much about because I didn't really grow up with it or had much contact with it. But yeah, so we'd be singing things in Hebrew and reciting things in Hebrew, but oftentimes, well, I want to say like services are shorter, but like maybe not. Growing up, it's like, okay, everything felt very long.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But I forgot the question about where.
Like, do they do the exact sort of same prayers, or is it very different?
No, a lot of the same prayers.
Okay.
A lot of the same prayers, but there are some different like Psalms would maybe like in the new shul we do more Psalms incorporated, whereas in Reform where I grew up, we didn't do as many psalms incorporated into it, and other things like an ending prayer that we do, which is kind of like a glorification of, well, it's like this poetry, I guess, and it incorporates different pieces of psalms. It's all like tacked together, but I didn't learn that growing up, and so I was like, I mean, I still can't recite it because it goes very quickly, but growing up, that I was like coming to the new show, I was like, whoa, this is new. But like from my background that I had in Reform Judaism, I think prepared me for then going to this. But I also had this intermediary part of my Jewish journey of Chabad, which is a sect of Judaism, but it's more leaning towards the orthodoxy, but they're their own kind of approach. I want to say like they're kind of like Messianic Judaism in the sense that they are wanting to bring Messiah now, and not like Jews for Jesus, Messianic Judaism. So a little bit of a different approach. But within that, helped prepare me because a lot more Orthodox, a lot more traditional liturgy, a lot more of the like defined, and this goes into the realm of like gender and Judaism, but the defined separation of things. And so, for example, like at Chabad, when I have this distinct memory of the Chabad house and going to, I think it was either Rosh Hashanah or maybe not Rosh Hashanah, but like some Saturday service or some service, and there's the tradition of separating men and women in the prayer space, which is called a mechitza, that separates between the two. And in the house, because it's always like a Chabad house and it's very homely and family oriented, but like the women were in the back of the room and the men were at the front where we had a Torah. And in the back of the room, our mechitza were these like fake IKEA plants, like so it was just to keep the separation. Yeah. Okay. But it was just in my mind I was thinking, it was like, this was just so funny because typically it would be like a cloth or something or like lace or something that like kind of blurs the boundary, but like you're not together. But you know, or in traditional spaces, it would be a women's section, either split across or above. Surrounding like a balcony, women's balcony, and then below would be where the men are. But yeah, I learned a lot in Chabad, basically, is where I was going with that. Is of like, that was a pretty defining point of my Jewish journey as being a woman, and like, what does it mean to be a Jewish woman, and what does it mean for all of this kind of stuff? But I would say Chabad really did prepare me to then make this next step as I moved out to Arizona and joining the New Shul, and that sense of, okay, I'm prepared coming from that background of Reform Judaism, looking at Chabad and more Orthodoxy, and then coming to this more egalitarian
middle ground.
Yeah, it mixes both.
And so you did the Chabad when you were in New Zealand?
No.
Okay, that was still when you were in California?
Yeah. So that was when I was in like I studied abroad in my senior years. Okay. So I was at Chabad from my freshman, sophomore years, and then my senior year as well. Okay. So I learned a lot because I was like impressionable at like 18, 19, you know, like searching and what options are there, and then, you know, all the clubs on campus. And then, I mean, I knew that I wanted to like go into some Jewish organizations when I was in school, but my parents were always like, oh, Chabad is like, they're going to suck you in.
And they did. And they did.
But my parents were like really supportive. They like came to like Shabbat dinners and stuff that the Chabad put on and stuff. And so they were like really supportive because that family is like so nice. Like, I mean, every Chabad family is like so nice, but yeah, anyway. So I would say that was a pretty defining place but there's Chabads everywhere. So like, yes, there's Chabads in New Zealand, and we might end up going there when we move back. But yeah.
So you found this through just a college group, and that's sort of what drew you to it, or did you have sort of this other intentional path towards something that was more traditional?
That's a really good question. I think there's something probably innate pushing me towards that. Because looking back, I don't know if there's any defining point to be like, yes, I want to be more observant. It was just kind of this natural progression of things. But I did know that I wanted to be involved in Jewish life on campus because that was a pretty important piece of my identity. So, and also like there's other ways to be Jewish. Like I can, you know, interact with a lot of people that are Jewish and are of my own peer group. And like, we're all on this kind of self-discovery together
Yeah.
in our different ways. And so I also, like, there's also, you have Chabad, you have Hillel, you have all these other, like, Jewish organizations and you know, Zionist organizations and different things like this. So I was, like, involved in a lot of different stuff. But I would say, like, religiously, the thing that oriented me more toward, or like that I was oriented more towards, was more of the tradition and seeking more of that. And I think a big defining person as a part of this was the rabbi's wife, called a Rebbitzin, but her name's Miriam, and she's amazing. And and very much embodied, like, Jewish femininity to me, and but very traditional Jewish femininity. So the sense of, like, women's section, and, you know, wearing a sheitel, which is like the wig over the hair, and, you know, pumping out children for godly duties, you know, like. But it was like this beautiful, beautiful, like, genuine self-expression of femininity, and I was like, wow, that's really, like, impactful.
Yeah.
And I can, like, I knew that I didn't want to go into Chabad. I knew that was not the traditional form of Judaism I was looking for, but it was really influential in part of the decision, maybe looking back, decision making around becoming more observant. Because I was like, if they can do it, like, I can do some of this, you know, I can take on some, which is ultimately what they want, because it's like the more mitzvahs that you can do is going to bring Messiah. So, like, we need more Jews to do more mitzvahs. So, like, come, you know, that's their whole kind of, like, messianic approach of, like, or, like, proselytizing in a sense of, like, you're Jewish, come and do this mitzvah, and yeah, you did the mitzvah, so that's one more point for Messiah to come. So
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's very interesting. So you started mentioning sort of this idea of, like, Jewish femininity. What has Judaism taught you about the feminine, and how do you see that sort of in the Torah and the way that it defines not only the story of the Jewish people, but just the practice of that and incorporating that into having a good life?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So I think it's hard because it kind of comes from a feeling realm, but I would say femininity on the surface in Judaism is very absent. If you're trying to look, I mean, you'll see it because you have these biblical characters, and you have, you know, like Sarah and Rachel and Leah.
Are these your fiction?
These are my biblical fiction books that I enjoy reading, which have been very influential as a part of, like, my adult journey in Judaism, and also, like, getting back into reading because I didn't like reading for a long time. But you'll see, you know, you see these characters throughout the Jewish Bible and the Torah and all these other books. We have books that are named after women, like Ruth, and, you know, the story of Purim and Esther, and all of this. And so it is there, but at the same time, if you're, like, reading into it, it's like, okay, like, but these are women, but, like, where's the feminine aspect of the divine specifically? And so if you're looking at that, and also, like, seeing the traditional forms of, like, how Jewish women are, it's like, oh, you know, a lot of people will come to me like, oh, well, they're so oppressed, like, these women are at the mercy of their husbands, and da-da-da-da-da, and, like, all of the Netflix shows that are coming out now, it's like, it's very much this type of, like, these poor Jewish women are so oppressed in their, like, backwards society, and it's like, no, but yes, I see where that's coming from, but at the same time, it's like, you know, like, there's a lot of hurt in these in these stories that are coming out of people's experiences. So it's like, this is a very broken form of, like, connection to the divine, to their community, to the religion, but I won't go there. But back to the question around what women seem at the surface level seem very absent, or, like, the feminine aspect of the divine seems very absent in the stories in the Torah, but upon deeper level, very much present in my experience, but as well as, like, Hasidic experience of the Torah too. It's hard because it's, like, not as part of traditional Judaism of, like, yes, Hashem is feminine. Like, that's not somebody's approach to Judaism, because, like, of the language that we use being much more masculine. And at the same time, like, the language was reflecting our experience too. And so who are the ones writing the Torah, who are the ones reflecting on the Torah, are men. And so that language to be able to connect to the divine, and also something like within Chabad as part of their, if you like ask a Chabad woman of like, well, why don't you have to do all these mitzvahs? Like, why do women are not able to like read from the Torah? Why aren't women able to do the things that men are doing? And the approach is, well, women in this like Hasidic perspective are born closer to the divine in a way, whereas men are not. And so they have to do all of these ritual to be able to remind themselves of the divine. So like covering their head with a kippah, or wearing the tzitzit, the prayer shawl, and the strings are all of these physical reminders of divinity, and to be doing mitzvot, and to remember, basically like just to remember to do the thing that you should be doing. Whereas like for women, it's like there is this innate thing within us that makes us closer to the divine. I mean, from a Chabad perspective and like other Hasidic perspectives, but I also think that in a way of like, especially around menstruation, for example, like feel very embodied, feel very connected in those time frames, and having that connection monthly, it feels really embodied and feels really divine in this type of practice. But in the traditional perspective, you know, like if you're reading the Torah, women are unclean and ritually impure and like shouldn't be touching these things because they're extremely like potent and like full of energy, or whatever, like divine energy, I guess. But anyway, where was I going with that?
I just think that's a very interesting way to describe it, because I think often people from the outside would see something like, well, women can't read the Torah, and it seems as like a restriction or something not worthy. But on that opposite end, where it's like, well, it's for the men's benefit because they can't remember. I mean, that's obviously a caricature, but that's just so interesting to kind of flip that on its head and say, oh wait, it's not a restriction because someone's not holy enough. Almost they have this different embodiment of the holy, that practice isn't as necessary for them. Is that how you would describe it?
I would, because there's only 3 standard mitzvot that a woman is held to, and which is lighting the Shabbat candles, so bringing in this spiritually pure place of divine connection, being this day of rest, why am I forgetting it? The second is challah, and making the challah bread, and taking, but at the same time, it's not just about the bread, it's about like the gifting. The challah itself is not the bread, it's the taking away of a piece of the bread, a piece of your earnings, a piece of your gifting of something that you've made with your hands, and giving of yourself. You're giving a piece of the self to divine purpose, because the challah is this piece that's taken away, and it was typically given as tribute to the priests. So they had something, you know, whereas now we burn it to give it as like a offering. And then the other is ritual family purity, which has to do with the mikveh, and has to do with sexual interaction with your husband, and has to do with the producing babies for divine purposes. So like those are the kind of three main things that women are held to, which has to do a lot with the body, has to do with a lot with feeding, and care, and all of these very like feminine attributes. Where when embodied is, I think, is embodying that divine feminine that complements the warrior god, that complements the, you know, keeps him in check when he's like raging against Canaanites, you know, like. But yeah, for those physical reminders of like that men are held, like, and this again is like very orthodoxy, Hasidic, traditional perspective, but that's not to say that it like women don't do these things within Judaism. So kind of going back to the other question of like, when you see a Reform synagogue and a traditional synagogue, what is something else that you would see different? Is that women have roles, leadership roles, and wear and do the things that men do. So that would be ritual for men, for that physical reminder. And so that's why I like the new shul, because it is this kind of social egalitarian approach, because women, we have a leadership role. We can read from the Torah. We're not considered impure. We're, involved. We're wearing, the prayer shawls, and some women wear tefillin, which is like the phylactery box that you wrap, which are all these things that men would typically do. So it is this very like egalitarian approach socially, which like either jives with people or doesn't. But then the liturgy is traditional. So even though women are doing all of these things, we're still reading in a masculine way. So the traditional liturgy and the traditional things that we'd be saying are all masculine. So on some level, it kind of, that also may or may not jive with somebody. But for me, it's like, this is this perfect symmetry, because I knew that I didn't want to go into Chabad. I knew that was not how I wanted to represent my Jewish femininity. But at the same time, I knew that Reform Judaism was not also my spiritual home. So this is kind of like a good, it's a good in between.
So for someone who maybe doesn't know all of the ins and outs of what it would mean to be like a traditional Jewish woman, or embrace that sort of divine femininity within Judaism, how would you sort of describe that? And then for yourself, did you ever have a struggle in trying to sort of embody that, or how you fit within that, coming from sort of Reformed and now trying to move towards something more traditional?
Yeah. For somebody who doesn't necessarily know what that looks like, I think it's starting somewhere. It's starting somewhere. Just with anything. I mean, that's why it's this journey. Once you start, you can't really go back, and you're going to be someone completely different as you move through it. But I think it's the pull towards that is what really is the driving factor, which I think is a very divine calling.
Yeah.
But for somebody who doesn't know exactly what this is looking like, I don't know, because like being a Jewish woman is different for every person.
Sure.
And it also depends on like your religious background and like how you're representing that. But I think for myself, it was the things that, okay.
I mean, like what certain things did you start embodying? Like obviously you cover your hair.
That was a later addition. It's something I played around with though, like I think play is also very important too when it comes to like figuring out identity. But I'd say for a lot, and this is like just for a lot of people who are just like maybe not Jewish but thinking about becoming Jewish, is like a Shabbat dinner. Like that is that's what we like to joke about, is like that's the thing that just brings you in, or some sort of like a Jewish food ritual. So like Passover, Pesach is also a good turning point for a lot of people, because it is this like shared food experience and just a shared experience. But I would say Shabbat was probably the first thing that I started incorporating more so weekly, since it is a weekly tradition holiday, and that lighting of the Shabbat candles. So that was like a mitzvah that I took on. I was like, okay, I can do this. Like it's lighting candles. It's me coming into this space and setting that tone. And so, and that also was like helpful with Chabad, because they're like, you come for Friday night dinner, you're hanging out with all your friends. So they make it very accessible. And so like they just start drawing you in. So I'd say Shabbat was the first thing that really drawed me in. And then moving through this, I mean, I also come from a background of like women's groups, I guess. So I was a Girl Scout from like kindergarten all the way up to like my senior year of high school. So like I did the whole thing, and that was like really important because it gave me a lot of foundation of women working together towards a common goal and sharing this experience along the way. So that was helpful as kind of like girls groups and
girl power. Yeah.
And then moving into college, I joined a Jewish sorority. And so that was also, I knew that I didn't want to be like a sorority girl. But this Jewish sorority became an option. We had a chapter on my campus, and of course they're like, we need more people. So like they try and pull from all these and recruit specifically from the Jewish organizations. And I've always just been much more of like a leadership oriented person as well. So like I, throughout my college years too, I was like very involved with all of these Jewish organizations and like sat as like board members on them and what have you. But anyway, joined the Jewish sorority, and that was helpful too, because that gave this same kind of theme of, it's kind of missing Girl Scouting of like women working towards a common goal. And so then it was like, here's an opportunity. And so I was like, okay, cool. And it has helped with the Jewish journey piece of like, I was really seeking different things and also very intimately working with Chabad and such, this sorority as well. But where was I going with that? So then having kind of like some of these learning events, for example, like in our sorority was like, you know, let's have a challah bake and understand challah and have like Chabad and the local like Orthodox Jewish community teach us about challah. And so kind of taking on these different things through the action of doing that and through this kind of support network of women. So that was helpful. And then as I moved through things, just kind of seeing that beautiful embodiment of Jewish womanhood through people like Miriam and through people like that were just living this Jewish life very authentically. And it was like, that's something that I admire and something I'd like to like start bringing in. And so then getting married, I mean, this is like jumping ahead, but like jumping far ahead, I was like, okay, well, I was playing around with like, do I want to cover my hair when I'm married or not? And on our honeymoon, I was like, well, what do you think, Gabriel, if I like cover my hair? And we're like driving through all the wilderness of New Zealand. And he was like, that'd be, you know, like, it's up to you. You know, this is your decision. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to. And so, which was extremely helpful, Cassie. It was so incredibly helpful for me because being that in an international relationship and us getting married, but then we had to be apart for a year after being married because of immigration processes and et cetera, et cetera. So we did a process where we were split, but married. So I went to New Zealand for 2 weeks of the paid time off that I had, got married, went on our honeymoon, and then came back to the States without Gabriel. So now I was like in this new status of being married, but didn't have the person there to like define that, except for a wedding ring. And so like it was a very transitional time, and it was very difficult for me to come to terms with like, I'm married now, but I don't have this person with me, and I can't start this life with him, but I'm starting this life with him. So the thing that really helped me with that is like the ritual of covering my hair, because that was a marked status saying I am different. I'm in a new stage of my life. I am crowning myself in beauty. I am also representing myself in a way that I want people to see me. I am showing myself, not my whole self, because now I'm saving this to share with those that I want to be sharing this with. And so it was, covering my hair became a very important ritual for understanding the transition.
Yeah. Well, it's just that it's like this physical reminder of like, there is something different. I could totally see that, especially being like separated, where it's like there's been this change, there's this newness of like you've become married, become one, and then yet you can't feel the tangibleness because he's on the other side of the world. And I could totally see how that just visual symbol could help you in that reminder and like get your mind in a place where you're learning to understand what it means to be a part of that. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So that, I mean, everything that you've just explained is like what those, and at the time was not able to put into words. Like it was like, I feel compelled to do this because I need something. I need to be able to have something tangible to come to terms with this new status. And this also had to do with like some of my upbringing as well around sexuality, but it was very helpful. And like, I'm one of the only people in my community that like, covers their hair. I mean, some women like will wear hats, which is something that they do to mark status as a married person. But I'm one of the only women that does cover their hair. And some women will cover their hair when they go into a religious space, but like I cover my hair all the time for this reason, because it was very helpful for me to come to terms. But now that like we live together and like I'm like understanding what it means to be married, it's like I can be a little bit more lax now. But like at the time I was like, I need to be stricter because I don't understand this. Like, and I need something that has structure to be able to come to terms with this transition.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just so interesting. I think for myself, in the last several years, I've really tried to understand what is the Torah. I mean, I obviously come from a Christian background, so I have a different perspective of it. But yeah, there was something about kind of reframing in my mind that idea of all of these laws having these spiritual implications, and like the things that you're doing create a space where you yourself can embody the spiritual and prepare you in that way. And I can see like the way you explain that with the hair covering, like that makes sense. So it's kind of cool to see that play out and see that sort of in a modern sense, because I think it feels so separated now, because in our general culture we don't get it.
Yeah.
Most of us don't get it.
Yeah. And for so, like, that's the other thing too, is like for so long women have been covering their hair, and it's only recently that it's like this uncovering and this sense of freedom, right, that can kind of come with that.
Even in the 40s, you know, women would have their hats and the pins and all of this stuff.
And now it's like weird.
Wild and loose.
Yeah. So it's also kind of nice to be reframing in this way of like this is something very special for women to be able to share their beauty in this specific way. And also at the same time, but also in this whole wild and free, you know, like, you know, there's in feminism and or like this whatever stage of feminism we're in now, who knows, but like
4th, 5th,
whatever iteration. But with that, it's also like with modest dress as well, because this is part of like being Jewish women and what have you, is like being sneas or having modesty law and upholding that too. Is I don't see it as what's this
like oppressive.
Yeah. I see it as very much like me having control over how somebody's seeing me and how they're looking at me and taking in my visual body, I guess. And same thing with the hair covering because like I will also choose to be more like free flowing, and with those that I choose, but those that I choose are probably going to be around women. Like I will most likely not uncover my hair if it's just men around, or if there's one man that's around, because I know that I'm a beautiful person and I want to be exclusive with who I'm sharing that with. And most of that time it's going to be my husband, but also like my lady friends. So yeah, that's also a part. I see it as a very radical way to be in the world.
Control.
Yeah. And to be representing myself to other people.
I mean, what would you say the biggest differences are sort of in this idea of like a Jewish femininity and embodying that versus what we would see as feminine in our culture today? Like what we learn from the movies and TV, or just, you know, in our sort of more secular world, like where are you seeing the biggest differences between those two things?
I mean, I think there is a lot of overlap in regards to like the archetype of femininity of like the caring and the like housemaking and, you know, like painting your nails and stuff like that, you know, like that. There is a lot of overlap when it comes to like beautification and care and motherliness and this kind of softer, compassionate aspects. So I think that does align with a lot of like, again, like with these 3 like mitzvot that women are to uphold. There is a lot of overlap with that. But at the same time, like, you know, like I'm wearing pants, which is like not part of traditional Jewish womanhood, you know?
Yeah.
And so like, I think it's all about like I don't know, this is just my approach, but like I've heard other like traditional women talk about this, but it's like within the boundaries that we have, that you are choosing to uphold, of course, like how can you express yourself? How can you express that authentic self and not just feel like you need to, but it also depends on like your maybe like your external surround, like your community, because it might be like you only have the choice between navy blue, black, and blue, you know, or like whatever. You might only have these 3 colors to choose from. So like, how are you gonna? But I think it's all about like that kind of authentic self and the way you express yourself. And that's also why I enjoy covering my hair and dressing myself in specific ways, because it is this authentic expression of my own femininity and the ways that and that sense of play that kind of comes with that. Like, I really enjoy picking out an outfit and basing it around something. So like I really love this shirt and it's really fun. But it's also like, I'm this blue head covering that has like little bees on it. It's quite fun, which then like Gabriel's wearing a shirt that's also blue that has little birds of paradise on it. And then it's like, we're matching the birds and the bees, like, so it's a quite fun expression as well. And so I think kind of working within that traditional frame of mind and taking that and plopping it into like our current society of like, this is the representation of that, is this sense of like, I'm still very feminine, but I'm at the same time, like, I'm wearing men's pants, or not men, these are not men's pants, but like, like I'm wearing pants, which like, according to like Leviticus, like, you're not supposed to do cross dress, but it's like, this is a modern expression of womanhood, of wearing jeans. So, like, I mean, I don't really think about that when I'm like to that level, but
But some people probably do in certain communities.
Yeah.
I mean, you see that too in other religions. Like, obviously there's different branches of Christianity that have different levels of the way that you can express and what women are to do. And like, I found it really interesting too, because I grew up sort of evangelical, and we had a church experience where the pastor kind of went off the rails, decided to fire all his accountability, and like made the move to try to be like super Mennonite. And he and his family eventually became Mennonite. And just the way that it was put out was just very unhealthy, and sort of that idea of forcing the women to put the head coverings on was always sort of a negative association, but then coming into more traditional, like being drawn into more traditional expressions and seeing it and finding a beauty in it was something I never thought I would see or feel.
Right.
And I think it's just so interesting, because there's a certain level in which some of these very traditional roles, like, being a stay-at-home mom, being a mother, being a homemaker, cultivating these things of being a hostess, can almost feel oppressive or limiting. And I think it's hard too in some of these ways where there's a lot of women who, like, I include myself in it, where I don't feel like the most drawn to that type of expression. Yet there's, I think, a battle within me, especially as I get older. Is there something within me that's fighting that's actually doing a disservice to understanding what it is to be a woman? And is there something that I can learn by embracing those things? Yet there's that other part of me that's like, but there's so much more than just that to like the way that women can express themselves and add value to the world. I don't know, it's a very interesting like fight in my head.
Yes. But I think that tension is helpful for decision making on some level, and like drawing towards what's meaningful. And I mean, so also like I'm thinking about my other part of a journey of like my hair journey, because this is also like a part of a hair journey. So, but it's like oriented towards beauty, which I think is going to be helpful for another conversation soon to be coming. But for me, I had this hair journey because it was also part of like transitions, but I put dreadlocks into my hair through college, but I did them one by one, and also had like as part of travel also kind of like incorporating different pieces of that, like little charms and things like this as I was traveling. But there was part I felt compelled as well, like there was something drawing me towards doing this, which also was this beauty that was authentic beauty that was exhibited by something so wild, I guess, and like non-conventional. And I don't know, also restrictive in a way, because it's like the things themselves are like knotted and you know, tied up. And so I haven't really reflected on this, but like I ended up taking them out for our wedding, but because that was like another chapter transition that I was making. And I think it's because hair in Judaism is like really important too. Now that I'm like talking about this hair journey, but like hair is very important in Judaism, to the point of like covering hair is important. But also like if we think about Samson and like the Nazarenes and their like cutting of the hair takes away that spiritual power. And I think hair really connects us in some way to the divine, but I don't know how. But like I feel really like empowered by hair. It sounds so strange to say out loud, but you know, like really empowered by my hair journey as well as my Jewish journey, because they've been very intertwined.
Well, I think for women, hair does mean a lot. Like, you know, you talk about women who have to go through chemo and cancer and have to shave off their hair, and then the power of other women doing it with them. There's something about hair that is very powerful, especially for women. Men, I guess not so much. The biggest thing is when they grow it long and then they become sort of subversive to the understanding of what it is. But you're seeing that with women too now, where people just shave their head or the sides for like an expression. And so there's just there is a lot there about like hair. But I've never thought about it before, like not really in a full sense.
Yeah. And on that level of subversion, like I'm very much in that realm as well. Like hair being so important that I actually don't take it off my body. Like I grow out hair. And so, but I like that kind of in between too, of like this, like being feminine in this typical archetypal sense of feminine, and hair being so important, and long flowing hair and the beauty and like the sun off the hair, whatever, like all these like romantic poetry. But at the same time, like the growing body hair being very like subversive in our current society, being that we take off our hair, shaving it off by that, or waxing or whatever you want to do. But also traditionally, like this wasn't like women had a hair. And so that was something that was like really important for me too, as part of my hair journey, as well as a part of my Jewish journey. But like, I would say like body hair isn't like so particular within Judaism. But that was also very important for me to, as part of my femininity, to like reclaim this typically masculine, like body hair, but also like, this expression of femininity. Like I also see it as being extremely feminine to be like hairy. This is getting kind of weird, but
well,
anyway,
as a hairy person, I've never experienced that as being feminine, but I'll
understandable. And you know, anyway, that's a topic for another day.
We'll have a whole
gender and body hair.
Yeah.
I've written some academic papers. So
have you really about
my college years.
About hair and femininity?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, so another conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very interested. I have to read this paper now.
Gosh, it's probably really terrible now that I look back. I was like, I'm so smart. I'm talking about all this stuff in my senior year of college.
Aren't we all at senior year? Like,
yeah, I'm so incredibly smart. Anyway, Jewish journey.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think the last thing that I kind of want to touch on, sort of about this divine feminine. So Gabriel, your husband, he's Catholic or Christian, exploring different types of Christianity, but grew up Catholic. And I know that you've said you've been to him to Mass, and you've been to some Orthodox services. And I don't know, talk about your experience seeing sort of like some of the saints and Mary and that divine feminine, because I just find it so interesting, your perspective on all of that.
For sure. And I would say, let me just preface this, that like my perspective when it comes to the divine feminine is probably pretty heretical in regards to Judaism. But with that already disclosed, I think, I mean, growing up Jewish and having a very disembodied God, very much, you know, however you're picturing that or defining that, or how, you know, whatever that looks like, going into a very embodied godly place was very interesting for the first time. Because I was like, and I studied art history in high school as well as like one of my favorite subjects. So I was familiar with iconography, but like actually going into a church, and also like Italian churches, because I had the opportunity to go to Europe and like see these places, and like tears flowing in the like papal apartments, seeing these like frescoes that I studied. But anyway, going into these spaces, I was like, whoa, this is different, and it's very embodied. But then going to an actual mass, I was like, holy moly, this is an extremely embodied God here. Like I was feeling God in a very different way. And I think that is because I'm much more of a feeling person. So I'm like experiencing, and like visual person. So I'm like seeing and feeling a lot of stuff. And I'm like, whoa, this is not my typical experience of God. So going to one of the masses that we went to, and like being in different Catholic mass spaces, I would say that I'm much more drawn to the feminine representations of the divine. So the icons and such of Mary and Guadalupe, and I mean not maybe not as many of the saints, but more so like this representation of the what is it in
the Theotokos.
Yes. So this like embodiment of the thing
the
that
God bearer,
yes, but like, you know, like a nice not to say that Mary is this cup, but like,
but that
you know,
her womb would
like a nice bearer of godliness. And I was like pretty blown away, because I was like, this feels really warm, and it feels really like nice and comforting, even if, you know, she's like absolutely sad that her son is dying and such. But like just that beautiful representation that somebody has painted or carved or sculpted or whatever, to see that, it's like, whoa, I like this kind of divine feminine worship that's going on here, even though maybe from like, and it's like pretty evident to me, it's like, this is like the divine feminine embodied in this space, even if people don't want to be like, no, this is all about Jesus. And I'm like, I don't see that. I very much see the divine presence here, which like in the Jewish perspective might be the Shekhinah, which is this feminine presence that's dwelling in spaces, and in other areas, and like whatever, like fluidity, but I very much felt that, seeing some of these like icons of Mary and the Virgin, and just very struck by that. And as well, right, she's covering her head, like that's a big part of that too. And probably like culturally, she was probably covering her head as a woman in society at her time. But felt really struck by that, and really moved to see this embodiment of something that is extremely like modest, but also like most holy in this myth, or not myth, or however you want to approach that, but like in this story of this woman bringing life into the world, but bringing God into the world for those that believe in that. So like, I think that's a really powerful story. And for me, I know that we've talked about this before, but like for me, maybe we have, I don't know. For me, the Christ story, the Jesus story, is not as compelling as maybe perhaps the Mary story in some level. I think it's really beautiful, her story, but at the same time, and like being open to that experience. And maybe she was probably really pretty young to be making that decision. But I think, as we have seen in these other Jewish characters, or Hebrew characters as a part of the Bible, that they are also influenced by divine inspiration to make decisions about things, to make specific decisions about their families. And I think there's a lot of divine inspiration that comes through that. And one of my favorite women biblical characters is Rebecca, because she has to make a lot of decisions. She's also taking on a very important role in Isaac's life, being that his mother has just died, and she comes in as this caretaker, but at the same time, she has really big shoes to fill, and he's very much like needing help, and at the same time, she has to be very strong for her sons as well, and has to make a very important decision, but she's bringing this life in the world, and she's bringing in ultimately like our father of Jacob, and bringing in all of this down the line. So not to say that like Mary and Rebecca are the same, but like I see it as very like the divine inspiration really much speaks through these characters.
I think you can see some parallels too, where it's like both of these women agreeing to do these things that are kind of wild. Like for Rebecca, it's like marrying someone you've never met because some guy at a well said,
like, hey,
you watered my goats, you know, like you're my camels, whatever. And her just submitting to that and be willing to go on this adventure. And for Mary, it's this idea, when you really think about it in the culture, it's this woman who's accepting something that will bring shame to her, like that idea that, you know, to be pregnant and you know, out of wedlock, there's a certain level of social disadvantageousness that comes with that decision, but being willing to submit to that in order to move something forward in a more divine way. Like there are some similarities to it. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of I think it's something that's lost is really where I'm feeling this is like the feminine, like I mentioned before, like when we look at the feminine aspects of the divine in the Torah versus perhaps feminine aspects of the divine in Catholicism as an example, it's pretty blatant in like Catholicism that like the feminine aspect of the divine is very healthy, very much represented, even if it might be like the story is much more about Jesus, but like she plays a very important role as Mary, but also like she as the feminine of the divine, this counterpart to that. And I think because of that, things have become a little bit more imbalanced. And we do see more of this like oppressive perspective, and we do have a little bit more of that because we're not going to the depths, because again, it's very surface level, being that this is the written text. Who's writing this? Our men are writing this and interpreting this. And I think that oral tradition amongst women has been quite lost throughout our history, but like there's still the threads that are there, and being that in Judaism it's a very unembodied God, and therefore because our text is masculine, it's easier to map onto the masculine because the masculine God is doing a lot of this action. But there are these threads of the feminine in there, but it's harder to latch onto.
Right. Well, like I think there's so much about the space with the feminine in Christianity that I guess helps with that. I mean, you have Mary, but then you also have Mary Magdalene and these women who are followers of Jesus, and Mary and Martha, and you know the first women to find the first people to find the empty tomb are women, and so there's this place where, you know, within our stories, like women are there, like in the center, and it's something that can't be denied. And I'm assuming that's probably where a lot of that gets embodied in that way. I mean, obviously, I think there's been certain corruptions or misrepresentations of those things and you know what it's meant, but there's a lot of that in there, and I do think it's so interesting where some, I guess, iconoclastic types of Christianity would not see the embodiment in sort of icons sort of things, but there is something about sort of Orthodoxy or Catholicism or more traditional views using imagery and allowing that to be part of it, and something that's just not there in Judaism. Does that ever feel sort of odd to you to see sort of that embodiment of God with the images being Jewish?
Wait, so being Jewish, being that by me being Jewish.
Yeah, you being Jewish, like seeing these icons, like, or, you know, these embodiments, does it ever feel, because I know you said you're sort of like drawn by it and you see so much of like the whim, but is there ever a place where it sort of feels like an uncertainty of like, you know, we're idol worshipers or something?
I mean there is that thread of in our history and the antagonism that we've had between brotherly like religious nation, I guess, or like, you know, and, you know, just some deaths here and there, but you know, but I would say that, I mean, there is, no, but I would say within Judaism, yes. And that comes through a lot in some of the biblical fiction I'm reading, but I think also probably came through of like seeing them as like one of the books I was reading described, it was in like medieval France, but like describing Christians as worshipers of the hanged one. And like, it's very like negative imagery, but like also understandably, like there's a lot of tension going on and a lot of persecution.
Yeah.
But I mean, yes. So somebody who doesn't have an appreciation of art probably would come to that and be like, and from a Jewish perspective, like, this is kind of weird. And like, we have strict prohibitions against imagery. And like,
my parents, they're the same way. They're like, what really are these icons?
Like, so, what are you doing?
You know, you guys can come together.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. We will fight the Orthodox. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. No. So yeah, I mean, it is a bit strange to be like having such an embodied God, being that we don't.
Yeah.
But I find it beautiful. But that's I like art history is my favorite subject, and especially learning about like Renaissance art and iconography. It's just, there's something like, to be able to meditate on that and really find God in it, I think for a lot of people is really moving. And to have that vision as compared to like the text and like the very heady space that you're in, reading the text and pulling out the imagery and pulling out all this stuff from it, I think to have something embodied and visual to meditate on probably moves a lot of people and brings them closer to this realm of the spiritual and the divine. And so like similarly, like having these physical reminders that men are supposed to be wearing, it's kind of a physical embodiment of that as well, of like this reminder that like you are part of this divine plan and the divine is here. And so you need to remember that and do these things. But like having a visual representation, I think is quite helpful. And so to see the crucifix, or to see Mary, or to see these saints with all these imagery and like their things that they're holding, like there's so much, there's a story being told. And I think probably for like the illiterate masses of the time, it was probably very helpful too, to tell a story.
Well, yeah, icons, historically, like, well, even nowadays, you don't say that you paint icons, you write icons, because they're meant to be embodied stories and sort of these windows into heaven, and it gives you a picture of what it means to participate within the divine. And you see both male and female saints, and Orthodoxy has a little more structure with it than Catholicism does, from my understanding. But yeah, there's something about those images, and as Christians, believing that if Jesus became embodied, God became embodied, there is a way then that opens the door to being able to depict those things and tell these stories through these pictures. And there is something compelling in that sense as an artist, of seeing the beauty of those things and seeing how they can draw those. But I also understand sort of the complexity and the controversy that goes with that too. It's not lost on me for sure.
Yeah. Because it's like, are you sure you're not, worshiping an idol?
I know we vow to them,
Little,
it can look a little sus, and I'm sure for a lot of people there's that opening to do those things. But I don't know. I think it always sort of reminds me of like Genesis 1, 2, and 3, of going back into the garden and recognizing sort of that knowledge of good and evil, and taking those things yourself is always right in the center. It's like right in the center. And so like with everything that's spiritual, I think there's always that sort of that piece where you can easily take these things and corrupt them for your own good and evil, and make them into something that they were never supposed to be. And so anybody who's like in that spiritual realm is having to fight that and like make sure we're not taking that on our own.
Yeah. I think that kind of goes back to the point, like Yisrael being, we're battling, we're fighting with God. And it's always, and through that tension and through that like recognizing of, I'm making a decision. I have this before me that I can either use for good or use for not good. That inclination, striving, I think, is where I was getting, striving towards good and striving towards meaning with whatever resource that you're using, whether that be an icon, whether that be the talit, whether that be like a head covering, striving towards that meaning so that you're battling, you're in this active motion with God.
I mean, it's all we can really do as humans. Like, we're constantly battling the things and wrestling with our own perceptions and the things that culture's telling us, and just the ways that we're trying to make sense of the world, we can't help but wrestle. And I think there is something beautiful within Judaism, like that's at the core, where it's like there's an allowance for that, and there's a beauty in that. And I think for a lot of women nowadays, of trying to figure out what it means to be a woman, because you're supposed to be everything all at once and have it all, like we have to participate in that wrestling and that participation, I think, to find what it really means to do that. And I think there's a lot about the way that we can express the feminine in a divine way that I think can be helpful to be better in that wrestling match.
Yeah. And using your unique gifts of that, of using those unique feminine gifts to be able to bring that to the table with the action, to be that, bringing that authentic, your gifts, like going back to the challah, like bringing your offering to the table to say, this is what I have of me, and this is the way I'm showing up and representing, and therefore becoming more of that vessel for the divine to be born into the world through your gifts, through your uniqueness, through that authenticity. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's heretical, but like, so that we are all the Theotokos, that we all are bringing that and that godliness into the world through our openness to being moved by the divine.
Yeah. I don't know if it probably is theoretical to be the Theotokos, because I think probably trying to do theosis of being by like part of the word, but there's a part of accepting the journey she did too that like brings it back. So I don't know what my priest would say about that, but I get what you're saying. I like it. But yeah. So any last thoughts about the divine feminine, or something that we didn't touch on that you're eager to share?
Gosh, I mean, I know I said that I had a heretical perspective as a Jewish person. I don't know if I want to delve into that too much, but I mean, I think to that point around the oral tradition, perhaps that was maybe lost amongst women. I think that's where the biblical fiction comes in as a moving place for me, because it's like, these are ways that we can imagine and put ourselves into the histories of our women, of the Torah. And so these, Orson Scott Card is obviously a Mormon writing about these women, but still very helpful to put yourself into that, to their shoes. And so I think one of the most moving biblical fiction books that I've read is The Red Tent, which sparks a lot for a lot of people, and especially Jewish women. Like, there's something about The Red Tent, and then from there, all these other books that have been written by other authors that incorporate a lot of Jewish, or like Jewish women's traditions, I guess. Okay. So it also incorporates things from Torah, and like the scene of the sota, which is a woman, what's the word of, she's convicted of adultery, but she may be not guilty, and they uncover her hair and they do this ritual, and she drinks it, and anyway, she might like have the tummy sag. I think it's in Numbers, something like that. Yeah. So anyway, they incorporate a lot of that in the book. Like that tends to be like a very moving ritual, because it's like specifically about a woman, and like this kind of feminist perspective of like, well, is this, like, this is a way that women had agency of like, if I didn't die, then I didn't commit adultery. But no, but biblical fiction has been very moving for me lately, because it's a way to reimagine ourselves in those times where this information may have been lost. And The Red Tent is very moving, because it's very much about women the characters are Rebecca and Leah, and then their daughter Dinah, or Jacob's daughter Dinah. And she's basically a footnote in the Torah about her being raped by the men of Shem. And but this book gives them their story, gives them like this midrash around Jewish womanhood. And it's a very, very beautiful book, and I found it so incredibly moving. A lot of the ritual and tradition, and also influenced by like Canaanite tradition of the time. And it's just a lot of these books have been very, very moving for a lot of Jewish women nowadays, because again, like, we don't really have that tradition. We only have what's written there, and it's not written by the women.
Right. There's a lot of it's patriarchal, right? So it's a lot of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so forth. And there are stories about women. They're there. But yeah, there is more of a male focus, and that probably has a lot to do with just them being ancient as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that's very interesting. I think fiction and like storytelling in that way can help open our minds to things that we never thought of and really get us into a place to put ourselves. Because I think sometimes numbers a little bit, I guess, it can be so dry, and you read these weird laws that you don't understand, and to see them put into a place in a story that can give you categories for that, I think I could see how that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So it's been very, very helpful in my now Jewish adulthood of like, okay, like I can get behind this. Like this makes a lot of sense. It moves me to understand our primary text in a different way. Having that kind of imagination and even the play that goes with like the fiction and retelling a story. And I think it's kind of modern Midrash, and we have this whole tradition of Midrash and like storytelling and filling in the gaps of stuff. So I've very much been enjoying biblical fiction and just getting more insight into things. And it's been very, very, very helpful. And then, I mean, like I'm not like done with my Jewish journey, obviously, and like my whole life, but like that next stage is becoming a mother, and like that very next step of like how does that evolve into continued Jewish life and moving from this one stage into this next stage. And so that's kind of like what's on the periphery of, and like it's daunting, but it's exciting. And
well, and in Judaism, that idea of like bringing life is like highly important.
Oh yeah.
Where I think sort of in modern terms, children is sort of on the back burner. It's not necessarily the thing that's celebrated. It's sort of often put off. But yeah, there's something very spiritual about that, giving life and training it and bringing it forth so that it then can go forward and bring life. So I'm sure that, it must be like daunting yet so exciting to take on that piece. And like there is something so demanding of like of a woman, of like what it takes to like bring this thing out into the world.
Pretty physical. It's pretty physical.
But I'm sure it just is full of like learning lessons and teaching you things. And you really learn what it means to like understand your body, because it all changes, and then you've got another little body, and there's got to be so weird.
No, I have no idea. Full disclosure, no idea what it's like, but I think that's what I'm excited about is learning my body in a different way, and that physicality, just as like menstruation is very physical, and that deep embodiment that I feel like in this space, kind of going back to the other mitzvah of like family purity that deals with sexuality and deals with menstruation and going from menstruating to not menstruating, and in that time is just like very, like I am very embodied, and in that very embodied place I feel the divine filling in that space. In this space where it's like a little death and like, and there's the unclean nature around it, but I really don't see it as being spiritually unclean. I feel it very much like spiritually embodied in this space. But that's my experience of it. I don't think others have. Well, others may have that experience, but which, like, as one of the last things to leave off on is like the ritual around spiritual or family purity and using the mikvah, and this very much ritual of moving between two spaces of. The mikvah is this ritual bath that you immerse into and then come out of, which is like the ritual of baptism and all that. But we do this on a monthly basis as a part of this mitzvah that we uphold as part of family purity, which then like you then, like engage in sexual relation, which then like brings more Jewish babies into the world, and like all that. So like it all plays together, but like it is this for me, a very moving ritual, because I had a very moving experience with that the first time I did it. And so like it's ever evolving this journey, but that's kind of like the next step is like moving into this realm of like family purity as like the other mitzvah that I'm upholding. So I don't know if it's the best term for it. It's just what it's called, but Anyway.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate you sharing your journey. I think it's so interesting, and I love how it's sort of all interwoven and kind of continues to teach you like what it means to be a woman and how to embody those things. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you. Yes, it's not too often that I get to talk about it and kind of reflect on my own experience and recognize how that's moving forward in the world and how I represent myself. So it is good to be able to talk through that, you know, and hopefully help other people with their processing.
Yeah, well, we're all trying to figure it out. So I think as much as we can like hear other people's stories, like the better off we are to figure it all out.
For sure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for watching. Like always, I will close with serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.